As I always say, there are always obstacles. There are obstacles in my business, there are obstacles in your business, and every dairy operation as well. So you identify them not because you want to dwell on the negative, but rather, as my business coach, Dan Sullivan, says, and this is a quote from him, he said, obstacles are the raw material for reaching your objectives.
Welcome to Rumination, the podcast that offers practical solutions to the challenges in our industry today. Hi, this is Gwyn, your host, and today I'm talking with John Ellsworth of Success Strategies about the current financial outlook in the dairy industry and strategies for success. For over 30 years, has served in the dairy industry, focusing on farm finance. He holds a Master's of Business Administration from Duke and a bachelor's degree in dairy science from the University of Georgia. 23 years ago, John started Success Strategies with the goal of helping his clients create and build strategic financial plans. John is a free contributor on farm financial health, on dairy business, and a past contributor on the Rumination podcast. Welcome to the show, John.
Thank you. Glad to be here with you, Chris, and certainly a timely topic for us to discuss. So I can assure you I won't have all the answers, but we'll have a good discussion and maybe give some people some very positive enlightenment as some steps they can take to get through this and weather this, challenging time that we're all going through, including your company, my company, everybody in the industry right now. It's a difficult time. So I appreciate the invitation to be here.
Thank you, John. The theme of stress and strain that stressors cause has been discussed as how it relates to the cow, her calves, the impact on production, reproduction health, and even more recently, we've looked at unique challenges and risks of rural mental health. So we feel, as you just pointed out, it's really timely to discuss financial stress and strain. So John, in your working, advising agricultural businesses and perhaps dairies in particular, talk to us about the strain that the current financial stressors of higher interest rates, softening milk prices, and continuing high commodity prices cause at the farm level.
Well, I think it's a very difficult time. As I said earlier, I think with inflation that we're fighting, not just in the U.S., but Canada, everywhere, we have just a higher level of inflation than we've seen for probably 40 years. And for our younger listeners, they probably never even experienced this before. And so I was fairly young when the last time we had this kind of event with inflation. But costs are just, the pressure on costs are crazy high. And unfortunately, it's being compounded by, I think, out of control spending, at least in the U.S. at the government level. And I think that has put upward pressure on interest rates to try to keep inflation down. But basically, it's like a perfect storm. And I think the challenge is that right now, in my own consulting work with one-on-one clients, I think I'm spending about a third of my time talking them off the ledge, so to speak, because there's some real challenges out there with the interest rates being higher, of course, trying to control inflation. Then you have the inflationary pressures where I can't have someone come out and look at a piece of equipment for less than $300, $500, and it adds up. And doesn't matter if you're milking 2,000 cows or 80 cows, it's still a very high pressure situation. And I think at the same time, we're seeing downward pressure, seeing a little relief on the feed cost side now in 2023, thank goodness. But we're seeing faster decreases on cheese prices. I think yesterday cheese was at $1.43 a pound. We haven't seen that since, I think I looked it up, it was like March of 2017. And even whether you think about it from a business perspective or from our personal perspective, all of our costs have gone in the last 6 years. 6 years and 2 months have gone up substantially. And so you get this crossing of costs going up so much, and now our revenue side's falling off. That's a very challenging situation where we have a collision of things that aren't real pretty, so to speak.
John, talk to me about the practices that you're advising your clients and in general producers to put in place to minimize that financial strain, that stress that it's going to cause.
Yeah, that's a great question. I have really felt in the good times and the bad times, I think number one, that people need to know their costs. And, there's the old joke about I can't be out of money, I still have checks left type of thing. But the reality is every operation needs to know what it costs them to produce. If it's a dairy, for example, produce 100 pounds of milk. What's their cost per hundredweight? What are their break-even levels? And you've heard this in other presentations I've made.
Yep.
10 articles I've written. If we measure something, we can understand it. And we understand it, we can control it. If we can control it, we can make improvement in that area. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about our grade point average of our student, or we're talking about Jefo sales, success strategy sales, or the profitability of a dairy. That same 4-step rule really applies. And I think it's crucial that people know what their break-even levels are. So can you always fix it? No, not necessarily. But I think the reality is there is a greater likelihood of succeeding when we do have a true understanding of what our cost of production is. And for example, in my business, I know that I know what revenue levels we need to keep to break even, and especially with flights going up in cost. When you fly 100,000 miles a year, as I do every year, that's a big expense area for us. So we try to monitor it very closely. And I would add that it's not that you won't or can't make progress in these difficult times, but you'll make it a lot faster and more regularly if you're monitoring these costs and your revenue and expenses very closely. And I do that with every client of mine every month. I just think it's imperative that we do that. It's the only way I can advise them, and more importantly, catch things early. Is labor going up? Yeah, probably as a rule, but is yours going up faster than 15 other operations I work with? So I think that's crucial.
These are strategies that a dairy operation or business should be applying anyway. But is there anything unique with the current strain or stress, as you said, that perfect storm that producers need to consider? Or is it just a matter of if you haven't done it, now really is the time to get it done?
Well, I think what's happening is that decrease in revenue on the revenue side, particularly milk and specifically, and the cost side is happening. I mean, it happens in every downturn, but this has happened a lot faster, I think. I've heard people likening this to 2009, which was a disastrous year where many dairymen got to buy their farm for the second time by refinancing through their way through that. And it's unfortunate, but it was just the way it worked out. But this has seemed to be a more intense drop in milk prices and rising costs, which we didn't really have necessarily as much in 2009. And it's happened at a more rapid pace, which makes it more difficult, more challenging for people, I think. So the speed at which it's happening is pretty daunting, I guess is a good word for it.
Yeah. With that in mind, in the past, you've written and you've spoken a lot about putting in place a business system that will help to manage financial strain. And wondering if you could expand upon that point and what it is a bit more in detail.
Well, I think it's a good time to use not just financial advisors, but all your advisors very closely. I think this is a time you really got to focus. If I knew how long this downturn, so to speak, is going to go for, I could be on a mountaintop giving advice somewhere, but I don't know, and none of us know for sure, of course. But I think it's a time to use your advisors wisely and maintain focus. Focus is a big word that people, I think, it's easy to get down in these kind of times, and maybe we all do it on occasions. But I think it's important to follow the advice of your advisors, your legal advice, your accountants, financial advisors such as myself, your nutritionists. I think we have to look for ways to not just cut costs, because we never want to cut costs to the point of hurting performance of your dairy herd, for example. But I think we've got to turn over every stone that's out there, every one that's available to us. And I think one of my mantras and this is good times and bad times, I think people need to decide what they want to see coming out of their operation. I think they need to define it clearly and identify, I call it their why. Because the big concern people have is, well, how am I going to do that? I think if you identify your why first, why you're doing this, why you're running your operation the way you are, why you're expanding, is it the next generation coming in, for example? If you identify your why, the hows become a lot easier. And then, as I always say, there are always obstacles. There are obstacles in my business, there are obstacles in your business, and every dairy operation as well. So you identify them not because you want to dwell on the negative, but rather, as my business coach, Dan Sullivan, says, and this is a quote from him, he said, obstacles are the raw material for reaching your objectives. And I think it's a great quote. So rather than dwelling on the negatives of the potential obstacles that you're going to face in expanding or becoming more profitable, I think you need to look at those and develop a strategy to get around them or get over them. Because if you think this through and you overcome those, guess what? Your momentum starts building and you start moving forward. And that's a positive thing in bad times and good times, milk price wise, things like that.
Yeah, if you improve your financial fitness through this stressful period or strainful period, you'll be in a much better shape when it turns. And of course, we know it always turns. It always turns to the positive.
Sometimes it always takes longer than we want, of course. But yes, you're right. It will indeed turn away. It will turn at some point.
And I love your idea of focusing on the why. That can put better clarity of sometimes why things are painful is because we're doing it for the next generation. We're doing it for a different reason. We're accepting costs because it's the right thing to do amongst our guiding principles of why we're doing it.
And I can give you a good example from my own business. We're in the process of introducing a financial software that I call the Success Strategies Advantage. And it's basically the same system I use with clients one-on-one, but it'll be online. It'll allow people to measure their financial performance monthly. And what I think is important is you have to have a system in place all the time. So if I looked at the how and the challenges, oh my gosh, how are we going to get this out to the market type of thing, then you just run around in circles worrying about it. But now when I focus more on the why would I put that out? And it's not about profitability. I mean, we'll be happy to make profits on it, of course. But I think the important thing is the why is I think about the number of people that could benefit from having a system like that. I can't be on 10,000 dairies, nor can you without your salespeople representing you, things like that. And so I think the why is, my why in that case is to help people get from where they are to where they want to go financially. And if that fits into the measuring, understanding, controlling, and improving process, we can help them identify where they may be higher on labor or fee costs or whatever measure we're talking compared to their peer group. I think that's a real positive. I think that's a real plus. And that's my why in getting that program out, for example. So I didn't want to sound like I was doing a commercial there, but I think giving people a real life application, even in my own business, would help them think about their own operation.
No, agreed. We do things because it's important. It's the right thing to do. That's following our why. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. So as we're winding down our discussion today, I always like to leave the audience with some key take-home messages. So related to business strain and today's markets that they bring, what would you leave with producers and their advisors some of the key take-home message, key points that you would recommend that they implement or work on today in order to get to the next really positive milk price?
Well, I think you always want to focus on the goal, and the goal is to become more profitable, of course, in a difficult time like this. But remember that ignoring the problems doesn't make them go away. And especially on the financial side, when you're dealing with bankers and a reporting system, so to speak, you got to plan in the good times to overcome times like this. Now, I will tell you that my clients are suffering this year too, but most of them, I would say almost all of them, have a pretty good system in place. So in the good times, we plan for these negative times coming because we know, you know, I know, and every dairyman knows they're going to come at some point, and we try to anticipate them. So on the feed side, for example, we try to prepare by having better contracts. That's not always possible, but one of the things I advise people, now we're seeing feed costs come down now. So should I run out and contract everything? Not necessarily, and that's not my area of expertise necessarily, but I think it's important to think about laying in tiers. So if corn's going from $300 a ton to maybe it ends up to $240 or something a ton, lay in those tiers. So if it bounces back up, you've got some locked at the decreasing cost, and but you're not trapped with all of it at 275 when it gets to 230 or something of that nature. I hear the big concern I hear now is I'm falling behind on my payables. Totally understand. Excuse me. I think it's a good time to communicate with vendors because the vendors know, Jefo knows, Success Strategies knows, we know that people are under financial pressure and it's pretty intense right now. But I think one of the mistakes that people make is not communicating with vendors. Most vendors are reasonably understanding and will work with you. If you've been a long-time customer, they do appreciate the conversation, the communication, but lack of communication is hard. Makes it difficult because we don't, as a vendor, we don't know what's going on. In terms of costs, I could just sit here and say, well, we want to cut as many costs as possible, but that would be kind of silly because the reality is we only want to cut costs where it doesn't hurt performance of the herd. In the case of a dairy, when we start hurting performance, that makes it really difficult. And I would end with this, and this too shall come to pass. This is a difficult time we're going through. The bankers know it. The producers know it. As vendors, we all understand it. We know that. And none of us knows. But I suggested to a client recently that they should talk to their vendors, as I mentioned earlier, but also talk to their bankers, because it's not an unreasonable request in my mind that if you have a $400,000 line of credit for feed in a time like this, or operating line, you may need to increase it to $500,000 or something of that nature. Not an unreasonable amount, but to get you through, even if it's a temporary increase for 6 months or 12 months, and then go back to the more normal level. I think people overlook that. And in all fairness to bankers, they have a tough job right now because they're trying to serve their customers, as you and I are, but they also have to protect the assets of the bank. But having said that, I think most bankers, good ag lenders, understand these cycles that we go through. And as a result, they understand that there may be a need for additional lines of credit as far as the level of the line of credit, for example. So I would suggest to listeners that they take a look at that. And again, back to the communication issue, and I don't want to sound like a professor here, but the communication is key with your vendors. It's also key with your banker. Let him or her know what's going on. And you don't want to be singing the blues to them, but rather make them aware of this is what's happening. These are the pressures I'm under. This is what I'm doing. I think any good lender would appreciate that input from their borrower.
No, I can't agree more. Thank you for that insight and sharing those wealth of ideas and experience with us, John. It's always a joy having you. So thank you again for joining us today on Rumination and for sharing, again, that wealth of experience and knowledge in the goal of improving relationships and financial viability of dairies throughout North America. Thank you again.
Great to be with you. Thank you for the invitation.
And if you'd like to learn a bit more about John's approach and financial health in general, feel free to go to successstrategies.com. And you can also hear John on previous episodes of Rumination on Season 3, where we discussed top strategies for the most profitable dairies. And I would surely want to thank our audience listening to us today. And I'll remind you that you can subscribe to our channel at jefo.ca, as well as so you don't miss any of our next episodes of Rumination. Please look for us at, again, jefo.ca on Apple and Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. This podcast was brought to you by Jefo, precision nutrition for a growing world. And have a great day.